you can pick anything because they're all going to point to the same thing. And the earlier you can go, the better, because from like an emotional, like trauma standpoint and healing those sorts of things, the earlier we can go, the closer we can get to kind of an inception point and an understanding of, oh, this is how I operate because of that moment, right? So the earlier we can go, the better.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Nate Ewert, who helps men to live authentically. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. Too often, our past prevents our future, and until we deal with it, nothing will change. The issues keep coming up in different ways. Most people will do just enough to stop the hurt, but not enough to make it never come back. Today, we once again focus on purpose, but from a different angle, by looking at our life-defining moments to inspire our focus, along with a lot more. I've worked with Nate in person, and I find doing this type of work is a game changer. Find the person who can help you to get rid of whatever it is that you don't want anymore and no longer serves you. Nate Ewert bridges ancient wisdom with modern neuroscience in his approach to human transformation. He started as a massage therapist in 2000. His own dark night of the soul in 2011 led him to pioneer a unique integration in somatic healing and masculine development work. Today, through Igniter Men's Group and Somatic Synergies, he combines certified expertise in conscious breathwork, trauma release, and nervous system regulation with deep emotional work. His trauma-informed approach helps clients, particularly men, caught in limiting patterns and societal expectations to release stored trauma, regulate their nervous systems, and access authentic purpose. Let's meet Nate and see how he does this. Welcome to Richer Soul, Nate Ewert. It's great to have you join us today.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
And I am excited to learn from you today and for the conversation. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
Well, money was kind of hard to come by when I was growing up. Didn't learn a whole lot of good, healthy, responsible ways to deal with money growing up. We moved around a lot. My parents often were jumping from job to job. I will say one thing that they did instill in me was the entrepreneurial spirit. When I was in high school, they opened a coffee shop. And so we're running a business for themselves. And I had learned about accounting, and I loved accounting classes when I was in high school. And I learned how to, count money and balance money and that sort of stuff. But as far as, keeping money, holding on to it, making it and holding on to it and using it as a good steward in my life was not something I was taught. We had rules like, oh, you should always save 10% or, do this. But I learned a lot as a young kid that money would go out as fast as it would come in. And, that's something that has been kind of in the world around me for a long time. So it took me a while to kind of get out there and start a business on my own. I think for a long time I was like, no, I'm going to find a good job that makes good money and I won't have to worry about that stuff. And, eventually the entrepreneur in me took over and had to kind of create my own way with that. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
It's funny. I think people are confused about this. They think accountants understand money, and they're very good about putting money in boxes, meaning on the spreadsheets or in the accounting software.
Yeah.
But they don't actually know how to manage and grow money. That's a totally different skill set.
It is.
And I think we look at people and expect them to know X, and they don't.
Yeah.
10% is a great place to start saving, but it's not going to make you wealthy, nor is it going to give you enough to really have freedom. You've got to get to much higher savings rates to be able to do that. Now, did you have jobs and then you said, oh my God, I never realized this is what it was? Or?
Well, I mean, yeah, I had jobs, but I lived in a scarcity mindset for so long, and I think there was even maybe fear around having money. It's like, oh, if we have it, we got to spend it on something, so it was, I mean, yeah, I always had jobs and I've done well for myself over the years, but there was always this like almost survival kind of instinct behind all of it, which made things really challenging.
Do you know where that attitude, if you have money, you have to spend it, comes from?
I don't. I mean, I think it was, I think I learned that. I think anytime my parents would have money or get money, it would go to bills or fixing the house or fixing the car or, so it was like anytime, there would be a good chunk of money for anything, it was already spoken for. Right. And the idea of, saving for retirement, of building wealth, we were in such survival mode for so many years. I mean, even for me as an adult for many, many years, being stuck in that like survival mode, you don't think about those things. All that matters is right here, right now, in this moment. And so it doesn't leave a lot of room for future thinking, if that makes sense.
It does. And, it's funny because I've studied behavioral psychology when it comes to finances. And people who are in poverty or in a poverty mindset can't think for tomorrow.
Right.
It's like, I've got money today. It's going to be gone. I might as well enjoy this moment.
Yeah.
And it's just a totally different way of thinking. And it's one that essentially is going to prevent them from ever getting there. But at the same time, people in that poverty mindset, especially in communities, tend to be much more sharing and helping. And I think part of that is because they realize at some point they're going to need help.
Oh, yeah.
And so it creates kind of that bond. But when people start to make it and have big money, it really creates issues in the community that they're in. So all of these things are kind of wired together.
Yeah. I heard when I first started working with a financial advisor, this is many years ago now, I went to this dinner that he was hosting and he was talking about like really large sums of money and how, the majority of people, if they win the lottery or all of a sudden get some big inheritance and they've never had money before, it doesn't matter the amount of money. It can be $10,000. It can be $5 million. It's something crazy like 95% of people who get something like that, within 18 months, that money is gone.
Yes, it's true.
And I have actually experienced that in my life. And when I heard that, I was like, my mom passed away very young when I was very young. And it wasn't a lot of money, but I got, I don't know, like $45,000 or something. And it was about that time frame. It was about 18 months. and it was gone. I put some into the house that I owned at the time. I bought some things that I needed. I squandered a lot of it away. But that really made me think, like, wow, why is that? Like, what happens there? So it's interesting. And, that scarcity, survival, kind of poverty mindset, just like you're saying.
It's partially that. It's also partially a temperature. Everyone's got their own financial temperature.
Yeah.
And if a whole bunch of money comes in, you're no longer at your temperature. So
Right.
you're going to do everything to get back to the temperature you are used to, good or bad or indifferent. So I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, definitely.
So are you still struggling with it, or is something shifted?
Well, I mean, yeah, some things have definitely shifted, starting to save for retirement and kind of watch that money grow. I'm still not exactly where I want to be, but my relationship with money has definitely changed over the years. I've gotten out of that kind of survival instinct and started looking more at the future and what I want from that. And also ways to get like off the treadmill of just making enough money to survive, right? Just to live. And so, finding other ways that generate money versus just, trading my time for money.
The age old search. So did you ever have jobs, or did you pretty much early on start on
I
your
did.
own?
And I've had some pretty good jobs over the years. I mean, I've done all sorts of odd jobs, but what made me transition from, working for other people into entrepreneurship, that's actually kind of one of the big sort of dark soul moments of my life. So I started my career very young as a massage therapist and was doing very good technical injury work, pain management, post-surgery stuff. And I got into education. And so I started working at a college. I was teaching, went back to school to get my bachelor's and started working my way up. And this was at the time, it was a nationwide school. They had, I think, 10 locations around the country. It was a private school. And I worked my way up to director of education. So I was, I had gone from massage therapist to, wow, I'm running a college in Denver here where I live. And through a series of several small or really big events, I ended up leaving that job. And within a year, I started my own company. And it's funny because I realized how much I hated working for other people, how much I like being my own boss, how much I like being in charge of the creation of my life versus just being a cog in a wheel. And so that was in 2011 when I left that job. Actually, in March, it was the end of March 2011. So it's been 14 years. I started my company, and it was, I found myself doing quite a few other little side gigs, some contract work and some things in some areas that I had some expertise outside of body work and healing work. And, I've been in business now for almost 13 years, 12 and a half years. And it's been great just being the kind of master of my own destiny. So
It is being great to be the master of your own destiny, but a lot of people struggle with it, I think.
yeah.
And the ability to do it on their own. And at the end of the day, you're responsible for your own income then, and which is very freeing. But at the same point, if you don't know how to do it, it's very struggling.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been struggle. It was a really steep learning curve, at first. And there's a lot of, I had to face a lot of my own fears. I had to face a lot of that survival mechanism, the scarcity mindset. And, those things still pop up every once in a while here and there, but, I've managed to keep a very good credit score and, and, handle business. Right. And I think that there's a lot of sovereignty, I guess, that comes in that, so.
There is sovereignty, agency, all
Yeah.
of those types of things. And it does take time.
Yeah,
I think entrepreneurship is a self-development journey.
absolutely.
And well, not everyone's going to go on the journey, but those who are smart will continue to learn and improve themselves as they go along. And now you're the boss, so now you're the evil job maker.
Yep.
So you got to figure out how you're going to build that and how you're going to make it so that other people don't feel the way about you that at one point you felt about others.
Yeah. And I've gone through some phases with my business. I've built it up. I mean, for me, pretty big at one time or another. And, I had many people working for me for a while. I was running kind of a big healing center and yoga studio, and through another series of unfortunate events, had decided to downsize. I call them the universal 2x4s that come along every once in a while and sort of knock you back on your path that you're supposed to be on. And over the last 3 years, what's funny is I've downsized my business a lot. So I'm down to, much less revenue than I was before, much less stress, and actually more profit, which is also fascinating, right? Work less, make more. How's that work?
It works quite well.
It sure does.
And on my other podcast, we talk about that all the time. We actually just came out with a new book, which kind of that is the title, Work Less, Make More, and Enjoy Life in Business, because that's what it's supposed to be. And I think too often we get confused and we think bigger is better or more complicated is better.
Yeah.
And I'm always confused that when you show people how to do simple, they won't do it. They want a complicated solution to life. I'm like, life is pretty simple. Doing simple is hard, but
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I've learned that especially over the last couple of years, the simple things aren't always easy.
No.
They're usually very clear and simple, but yeah. And, I think we get a lot of our emotional baggage kind of gets in the way of that sometimes,
It does. That's why it's a self-development journey.
Yeah.
So what's your focus these days then?
So I kind of have two separate ways that I focus my work with people. So I have my healing work, which is kind of my main thing right now. So I see people that are dealing with still doing some body work and breath work and healing work and coaching in that for, people dealing with anxiety, depression, chronic illness, that sort of stuff. And really, giving them tools to live better, to choose better for their health, their life, how they want to show up and be present. And, through that, I actually started developing a men's group, and I've been doing that for about 10 years. And that work is really where a lot of my passion lies, of really helping men that were, not too unlike myself, figure out life. Parts of it is money, but really a lot of what I focus on there is interpersonal relationships, presence, how to show up and be who you want to be in your life. And a lot of it is very simple and often very challenging.
Why do you think men struggle with this?
Well, there's a lot of definition out there about what men should be, who they should be, how they should act. And, I think that can be said for anybody, men and women and the like. And I think for centuries, there was a lot of community just in small villages, in, the way that society worked. And the more and more separate we become, I think the harder it is for men to not feel like they're on an island, that they're isolated. I learned from a very young age that as a man, you suck it up and you deal with your feelings and you get out there and you show up and you do the things. And I don't think that's the way. And, I have many groups over the years that prove otherwise. Like, I think that isolation and separation is very pervasive for men in our society, especially in America. And I think that there's a lot better ways for us to show up. And, I do a lot of work with like masculine and feminine dynamics. And, as a man, here's these certain ways that we have the opportunity to show up. So something like assertive versus receptive. In masculine and feminine dynamic, we would say, assertiveness would fall more on the masculine side of that polarity. Receptiveness would fall more on the feminine side of the polarity. For me, in my story, I saw assertiveness as aggression, as controlling, as chauvinistic at times. And it was like, oh, I don't want to be any of those things. And so a lot of that work is figuring out how we can show up in these really amazing, healthy beautiful expressions of masculine or feminine, but have choice in it and not have fear or control driving that ship. And so I think for men, a lot of that is, finding purpose in what they're doing and understanding that that purpose can drive them through a lot of the emotional turmoil, a lot of the fear, and a lot of the desire to control things that we don't really have control over. So
We have control.
right. Nope.
Before we get to purpose, and I don't know do you deal a lot with younger men or no?
Sometimes. So my men's groups are open format, so anybody can come at any time. There is education in all of them, but there's times when I'll have some younger men, early 20s, mid 20s, show up. What I find though is most of the men who come are typically 35 to 55. They've been in the grind for a long time, and they're trying to find a better or different way to be because they're burned out. Their relationships are not what they want them to be. Their career isn't what they want it to be. They're just kind of going through the motions and realizing like, wow, I don't want to live the rest of my life this way. It's great when the younger guys come in, and I love it because a lot of times they are so much wiser than some of us that have been doing this work because they don't have all of the years of the turmoil and the struggle. And so it's always great when some younger men come in and they're like, oh yeah, I get that. I see how simple that is. Okay, I'll do that.
I wasn't sure because I know there's been a big shift in how boys are being raised today.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure if that was starting to shift how they're coming of age and all of that. And if you notice that, but maybe that's not the group you deal with.
Well, as I mentioned, a lot of these younger men that come, like they have some things figured out. So I do think the way that they're being raised is different. They're more emotionally available. They don't seem as like traumatized by their upbringing. And they also have not necessarily had a lot of the initiations that kind of help you transition from, that kind of boyish charm, mama's boy sort of mentality into grown man. I have separated from the needs of my small little family unit and started to create my own life. And so some of those earlier transitions aren't as apparent as, maybe they used to be, or even in some, traditional cultures where they have like a set moment in time where, okay, you are now a man and here's what that means, right? We don't have a lot of that nurturing process, I think, to bring boys through that initiation into men.
And that's true. And what I've noticed lately is a proliferation of people offering that specific program, taking dads and their sons, usually 11, 12 to like 14, 15, and creating weekend getaways for that specific purpose.
Yeah.
With groups of pairs in that type of age circle. It seems to be a massively booming business.
It does. And I'm really glad for it because I think it's needed. There's a quote, and I can never remember who it is, but it's basically, it's like strong men make good times make weak men make bad times make strong men.
Yes.
And it seems we're in this phase of like bad times that are creating strong men because we've had some issues with some weak men, I think, for a while. And I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole because I think there's a lot of still kind of toxic masculinity stuff out there that's being preached, but I do think that's shifting. And I'm actually hoping to be a part of that. Or I guess I am a part of that.
Well, the boomers are about gone. And I mean, from the workforce, they are pretty much aging out.
Yeah.
And I think the majority of them within 10 years will definitely be gone. And there are cycles that occur.
Yeah.
And the cycle that you talk about is occurring. It happens about every 100 years, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And it is a typical cycle. And when you see the cycle, you're like, oh, this is why everyone's fighting and things are crazy right now. And it's all me, me, me. It's because that's where we are in the cycle.
Yeah.
And the cycle will turn, just like you said, and the next generation will
Yep.
re-begin. And then, of course, the same cycle will continue. And
Sure will.
100 years from now, we'll still have this conversation.
Yeah.
So it's okay. So you got men's groups, and you mentioned finding purpose. You've got a process to help people. Can we kind of go through that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. It is one of my favorite conversations to have. So the purpose conversation, I think, is really important, especially for men. You know, if we have purpose, it really can like set our direction, right? And anything that doesn't line up with that, we don't have to worry about, right? And it becomes very simple. And you know, the way that I see purpose, it's not something you can check off a box for. You know, it's something that we strive to be, we strive to show up as. And you know, you can have a product that you're selling or a thing that you do, a service that you offer, but I think like purpose goes beyond that, right? It's something that you show up as in whatever you are offering as your product or service, or you know, whatever it is you're doing. And this was actually a process that was given to me, oh man, probably in the first year I started my business. It was a coaching program I went through, and this was one of the first conversations they had. And it's really about finding out what makes you tick, to find how you show up. And then you can find all of the things that you want to do that allow you to show up in that way. And so it's something to kind of strive toward. So
what was this coaching program?
You know what? I don't even remember what it was now because they're not around anymore.
Oh,
it was like an initial workshop that they were using to try to get people into their coaching program. And it was this really simple process, back to that idea of simple. And I've taken it and tweaked it and had a lot of conversations around it. But essentially what we do is we look at two moments from your life, a really dark moment and then a really bright, amazing, happy moment. And look at the things that are all around that moment and what, you know, beliefs you put in place about yourself, what other people around you notice, how you show up because of those beliefs. And then we look at how those two things, those two moments are really the two sides of the same coin. And it gives us this way to recognize how we show up. And then we can start aligning the way that we offer things, the way that we do things in our life with the way that we show up. So it's this idea of finding the presence you have, the gift that you are, and making sure everything that you're doing is aligning with that. So I've taken myself through this process so many times. And every time I do it, I deepen my understanding of this. And so I'll kind of walk you through my process with this. And if you want to play along, great. So
sure.
The first moment we typically look at is the darkest moment, which is funny because most people can always find their darkest moment very quickly.
This episode of Richer Soul is sponsored by the Profit Answer Man podcast. If you're a business owner who wants to scale and grow, increase profits, or want to have strategic conversations around your financials, then check out the podcast. You'll learn how to work less, increase cash flow, increase profits, and build reserves to help you weather storms. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man podcast is a must-listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform. Question.
Yes.
Is darkest moment usually childhood or adulthood? Or does it kind of all over the place?
You can pick anything.
Okay.
Because they're all going to point to the same thing. And the earlier you can go, the better, because from like an emotional, like trauma standpoint and healing those sorts of things, you know, the earlier we can go, the closer we can get to kind of an inception point and an understanding of, oh, this is how I operate because of that moment, right? So the earlier we can go, the better. The dark moment that I usually pick, I grew up, as I mentioned, we were, kind of in poverty, and there's a lot of stress, a lot of chaos. And I grew up, I was born in the 70s, and corporal punishment was still around a lot at that time. And so I was spanked regularly. I was, it wasn't a safe environment. And there was a moment when I was 11, and there was a big fight in the family. I was doing something my dad didn't want me to do, and it got really intense. And there was a lot of yelling and all this, and the police were called, and my dad was hitting me over and over and over again. And I was black and blue on my back and down my legs, into my knees. And when the police showed up, I sat on the couch immediately. And without going into too much detail, my mom came home from work. My dad was taken away for a short time, and the police came in and talked to us and talked to my mom. And I stood up afterwards, after the police left and all the chaos was gone. And my mom gasped because I was wearing a tank top and short shorts. I was 11. And she saw that I was bruised down my back. And her words to me were, "It's a good thing the police didn't see that." And it actually took me a long time and a lot of therapy to understand this whole process, talking about emotional healing. But I know in that moment, there were a couple things that I learned in that moment. One was I wasn't safe. Two was my pain didn't matter. And three, I need to hide my pain. And so those three kind of ideas really permeated in my system and created a whole lot of decisions for me, or not created decisions. They made a lot of decisions for me, and kind of how I chose to show up and how I choose to live. And so what I've noticed now is when I'm having stressful times and when I'm in my dark moments, the feeling of not being safe shows up, the feeling that everything I'm doing doesn't matter, it's not enough. And those two things specifically have really permeated my life and kind of fed these, what I do doesn't matter and what I do is never enough.
Because you've worked with guys.
Yeah.
Does it really matter what the situation is? Are those the two underlying core things?
Those are big ones. Those are definitely big ones. They're not the only ones, but they are big ones.
Okay.
So safety and not mattering or not enough.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then we look at, well, how do people know when you're in that state? And I know when I get in that state, I kind of project that out. I make it seem like other people don't matter. I make it seem like other people aren't safe. And while I'm not threatening or I haven't, taken any of those acts with me as I've grown up and had my own children, that idea of, projecting unsafety, projecting, what you're doing doesn't matter. It's not enough, whatever, move on. Right. And that can show up when I'm angry, when I'm stressed, when I'm not. And people have let me know that on occasion. So the other side of this coin, though, is we look at these moments that are really great and try to figure out the internal dialogue of that. So one of the great moments I had was when I was promoted to director of education at the college. So when I got that job, I'd been working at the college for a few years and done really well. And I actually hadn't finished my bachelor's degree yet. And in order to have that position for accreditation purposes, you had to have a bachelor's degree. My boss, the corporate entities, they loved me. They wanted me in the position and built a staff around me in the education department. My assistant had a bachelor's degree and I was working on it and I was finishing it. But I got this job. I got promoted. I got hired because I was really good and because everything I was doing mattered. And I was a safe person to be there. And all of the internal messaging that I had was, wow, I actually am good enough. I actually can do these things. What I do matters. And what the people around me saw, my staff, my students, they felt seen. They felt heard. They experienced this real deep sense of safety with me working over them as their boss. And so what I got to see in that moment of looking at this really great moment and looking at this really dark moment was those are the exact same things. What matters is how I'm showing up in it. And the gift that I've seen over and over and over again in every experience that I have is that the people around me, just by me showing up, just by me walking into a room, they get to experience being safe. They get to experience being seen, being heard, knowing that they matter. And so this polarity that I've had to fight with in my own story of, do I matter? Do I not matter? Am I safe? Am I not safe? Is actually something that I present to other people without even trying. And so when I'm present, they get to experience that safety. They get to experience that they matter, that they're seen, that they're heard. And once I did this exercise, I actually put on my website when I had first started my business, this is a sacred space to know you matter and you're safe to heal. And it kind of became this almost mission statement for me. And now everything that I do, everything I choose to do, I have to ask myself the question, do I get to show up so that people can see that they're seen, that they matter, and that they're safe? And so while that's not exactly purpose, it becomes this really unique gift or drive that I get to offer. And anything that I do, I get to run through that filter of, do I get to show up in this way, in this situation? And in a nutshell, that is it. But it requires some work. It's simple, but we really have to look at these moments and, what was really going on internally? What rules did I set for myself in those moments? And what's cool about going earlier, like I actually have some memories of things going back to 3 years old, where I can say these exact same things and how that has shown up. And I see in a lot of situations over my life where, the people around me, they feel safe around me. They feel like they matter around me. And so when we understand those internal motivations, I believe it makes our purpose a lot clearer, because now we have a compass we can run anything we do through. And I can't check that off a box. It's just who I am. It's who I show up as.
Do you find people are able to make their own self-inquiry
I think so.
and look at these things, or do they need help?
I think they can. I have a worksheet. be happy to share it with you that asks these questions. What I find people have a harder time with is connecting the dots of seeing how those things relate, because sometimes the dark moment belief that you put in place doesn't always necessarily look like the opposite of the really great moment understanding of self. And so sometimes connecting those dots, people can need a little help sometimes. But I think most people can look at, in this dark moment, this is the belief I put in about myself. I'm not good enough. I don't matter. I'm not safe. I'm not loved. I'm dangerous. These beliefs that can permeate. And sometimes looking at the good moment oftentimes is harder too. But there are those, it's like, what's that thing that's giving you that sense of pride in yourself for knowing you did good, right? Is it that you feel loved, that you feel connected, you feel like you matter? I mean, they're simple, but they're big ideas of self. And I find over and over again, every time I take somebody through this process, when they realize what that good moment belief of self is, they realize that that's who they are and who they show up as and what other people get to experience about themselves.
That makes a lot of sense, because the way I think of this is, as a kid grows up and they experience certain things, they automatically, well, I shouldn't say that. They may decide that when I have kids, I'm going to do the exact opposite.
Right. I did.
Right. Which is yeah. So it's that concept of, that's where that back and forth come together. And I think that's a way that's understandable. So once you face these dark moments and you talk about all the things that you talk about, how do we let go of the emotion and tied to that and the trauma tied to that? Because I've got to believe it's not so simple to let go.
It's not. There's a lot of fear around it. A lot of the work that I do is taking people into those emotions, to feel them, to process them. Well, yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is the fear, thinking that, if I actually let myself feel this, I'm going to be destroyed, right? I hear that a lot from people. It's going to overtake me. I'm not going to be the same if I let this feeling come up. Nobody is going to receive me or accept me if I let these feelings come up. Right? Those are real fears, and they're not actual. They're real fears within yourself, but they don't come from anything of substance. Right? It's all of those beliefs built on top of beliefs on top of beliefs that, you're not good enough. You're too much in this way. Nobody's going to like you if you let this part of yourself be seen. Right. And so creating space for people, as I mentioned, I create space that's safe for people to know they matter and they're safe to heal. When somebody can be held in presence and let an emotion come out and actually let themselves feel it, even if it's just for 30 seconds of true presence of feeling something, you can wipe away 10 years of repression of that feeling, of fear of that feeling, just by giving yourself a few moments to just feel it. And maybe you have to cry, maybe you have to yell, maybe you have to laugh. Maybe it's not half as intense as you think it's going to be. I've found that over and over again with myself when I'm in a space, whether it's with a coach or another healer or facilitator that really knows how to hold that space to allow you to be seen. Sometimes that thing that you think is going to take years to process, 20 seconds and a little bit of conscious breathing, and it's gone. It's really fascinating to me. I see you're pondering.
I'm pondering because I know it's not that easy.
Well, it's not easy, but it's simple.
But the second part of that, though, because I know you do somatic work, is these things are stuck in our nervous system. And for the body to let go is not always so easy.
No.
The mind may let go, or we might tell ourselves a story, but yet the body still holds on
Absolutely.
to it. And it's funny because I think it might have been the last episode, maybe the one before, we had somebody telling their childhood story. And afterwards, we were chatting, and she's like, I didn't know how much I was still holding on to what that person said to me. And she's like, holy crap, the emotions it hit inside of me. And it was underneath the surface. It wasn't even like noticeable in day-to-day life. But when she brought it up, it was like the sucker punch. And she's like, wow, I'm still holding that. And it goes back to, it wasn't their darkest moment, but it was a darker moment.
Yeah. Well, and those things build. And I'm glad you mentioned the nervous system. That's a big part of the work that I do is helping people regulate the nervous system so that they can feel safe to feel those things. There's being a somatic practitioner with a big bulk of what I do, that's what I'm working with. I'm working with people's bodies, getting them in a place where we can start to flip some of those switches in the nervous system. Because if you have some sort of a trigger that starts to get your heart racing, that starts to increase your breath rate, that starts to get your mind racing, the last thing you want to do is open up and be soft and let yourself feel the sadness that you haven't wanted to feel, right? Like it's all airy-fairy, but it's real. Like your system is fighting tooth and nail for you to not feel this thing that has, permeated you for your entire life. But there are ways. There are ways to engage with the system. I use a lot of somatic experiencing work, which is a set of steps that we do to take people through this process to kind of get their body to start releasing. Trauma release exercises are really great. They get the body shaking. One of the ways that the nervous system can release some of that pent up stuff is through shaking. So we kind of fatigue some of the muscles and hold the body in positions, and it starts shaking. But it's a doorway to tell the nervous system, hey, it's okay to release. And so then this muscle kind of tension that starts this little vibration all of a sudden can become these really big, almost convulsions, for lack of a better term, of the whole system starting to release and start to flip those switches back to get you out of fight or flight. So you can actually, have higher executive function come back online. You can look at things a little differently and let yourself feel them. Breath work is another big one that I use, and working with that to help people, get into a state where, the consciousness is altered enough to where you can feel some of these things and be present with these things using the breath. Because, most of the time when we face something very intense, whether it's an emotion, a sensation, an old memory, it gets all of those things firing. And one of the first things we do whenever we feel something intense and our system starts getting kicked up is we stop breathing, or we get really, really shallow with our breath, really high in the chest. And that keeps that motor running. It keeps you going further and further and further down that path to complete fight or flight in the system. And so with that breath work, with continuing keeping the breath moving as things come up, it allows us to be present with them, to move through them instead of continuing the resistance to them.
The trauma release exercises that you talked about, is that Dr. Briselli's work, or is that similar but different?
Man, I am blanking. That name sounds familiar. There are a ton.
Are there multiples?
What's that? Yeah, there's a lot of them out there, and there's hundreds and hundreds of videos on YouTube that walk you through the process. There's, depending on who you watch, there's, 7 or 8 different physical movements, exercises you do.
Mm-hmm.
But what they all have in common is, eventually you're laying on the ground with your knees up and you're holding your knees in a certain position and getting the muscles to shake. And it can be a very calm process. Sometimes it can be very emotional. But yeah, it's used in several different modalities. I went through Rewire for my training on that. So,
and it could be that different people have done their own, but the concepts are all relatively the same.
A lot of it comes from kind of the 3 big names are Stephen Porges. He does all the polyvagal nerve theory. So there's a lot of ways you can access vagal nerve and do different toning and things to help calm the nervous system. Bessel van der Kolk is another big one in nervous system resetting. He's worked with a lot of that. Gabor Mate has done a lot of that.
Yes.
He's my favorite. I really like his work. I've read almost all of his books and taken a bunch of his classes. And, he's great.
And you have to find what works for you.
Yeah. Oh, Peter Levine. Peter Levine is the father of somatic experiencing. He's another really, really big name. And the trauma release exercises are part of the somatic experiencing process. You usually get into that at some point. Yeah.
Someone trademarked the TRE, so maybe they learned it and then they put their program on top of it, which is highly possible. But I've watched the videos and it's very similar to what you talk about. It's fatiguing the muscle and letting the body shake it out. And for people who think this is wild, if you watch animals in the wild, after they are chased, this is literally what they do.
Yeah.
And that's why they let go of the emotion. And it's the same thing that I mentioned to you. The body keeps score. Some people may have heard of that book.
Yeah.
It's letting go of the score and releasing it.
Yeah, it's interesting too, talking about getting rid of trauma. There's a huge piece of self-advocacy and that idea of sovereignty that has to come in, of taking back that control. I think it was in one of Peter Levine's books. He talks about this bus full of, I believe, junior high age children. The bus was in an accident. I think it rolled down a cliff. Everybody survived, but they followed these kids for many years after this accident. And they found, some of the kids ended up with some really intense and severe PTSD and anxiety and all that, but some of the kids didn't. And they're like, well, what's the deal here? How come some of them have and some of them haven't? And what they found was the kids that were able to survive and not have any long-lasting impact from that were the kids who helped. They were the ones who saw what was happening. They helped other children off the bus. They took action. They self-advocated for their safety. And I do see that over and over again. A lot of the clients I work with that are, have very intense trauma and problems with these things, in those situations, they were stuck. They couldn't act. And so finding ways to be able to take action back in those situations can help heal a lot of that also.
I am amazed at the power of taking action. And it doesn't matter what the situation is, whether it's learning a new skill, starting a business, starting a new job, anything. And I know this is true for me. The difference between 0 and 1 is massive. The difference between 1 and 100 is minuscule. It's getting that first action step moving Because I've got to believe if they're sitting there in that accident situation, the moment they start to help, they just keep going. But to actually take the step to help
Yeah.
is the hardest part of it.
Absolutely.
Being able to do that. So we've made all of this sound so simple. How long do you find it takes for people to work through this? And is it, for me, I find it's like peeling an onion. It's like, oh, I did this. Oh, wait a minute. What do you mean there's another layer?
Oh, there's always another layer. There's always a deepening. It really depends on kind of where you're at in the journey with this as far as how long it takes. I mean, I think some of this is a lifelong journey, right? Understanding self, understanding how we interact with outside stimulus, understanding how we want to show up. On a really basic level, I mean, I have many clients who come to me that, similar to what you're saying of this woman who's like, oh, this is still stuck in my body, right? They're like, I've been in therapy for 15 years. I can tell you my story backwards and forwards. I know it all. And when I get triggered, my body still interacts. It still skyrockets into fight or flight. And I don't know what to do with that. And, I find a lot of times when people work with me, we will know very quickly if this type of nervous system regulation work is going to work. Usually within a session or two, we'll see some improvement. Usually after 3, 4, 5 sessions, we'll see a good marked improvement that really lasts. But, everybody is so individual, and some of these cuts run really deep. And so there can be more layers. And, a lot of times I'll see people, they'll get to a certain plateau and they're like, wow, my life is so much better. I have choice again. I'm not afraid to go outside. This situation that used to really trigger me isn't triggering me anymore. And they're good for a while. And then, maybe they get in a new relationship, maybe a new job, maybe there's some life-changing event. And some of that stuff comes back, right? And they understand, okay, there's some deeper layers here that maybe we need to access and go through. So it's so different with each person. I find that the work works. It is pretty simple. And it's a big piece of that choice. It's a big piece of that taking action. You have to be willing to take that step. And I have worked with people that aren't willing to take the step. They aren't willing to do the work, to really let themselves feel the things. And a lot of times they don't get anywhere.
Is that the norm or the exception?
Usually the exception. Yeah.
So people are willing to do the work, or are they self-selecting because they showed up in?
I mean, I think that's a big part of it. Is I think a lot of the people that show up for me, they're ready. They've had some big moment where they're like, you know what, I can't live like this anymore. I don't care what it takes.
You know what I have found? I have found people get into a situation like that. Then they start and go do work, and they get back up a little bit, and then they stop doing the work.
Well, they get comfortable again.
And they don't go all the way. Okay.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do see that often. I love all the little tropes and metaphors and things that are out there, but it's like, change won't happen until the situation is more uncomfortable than the change is. And so, when people hit that breaking point, sometimes they're willing to go all the way through, but sometimes they just want to get some comfort back. And so they're willing to do a little bit of the change. They're willing to do a little bit of the work. And then, wow, life's feeling good. Things are easier again. Yeah, you know what? I can hang out here for a while until that next moment when the change gets easier than their current situation.
That's a shame.
It is a shame.
You got to go the whole distance.
I agree.
It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
Presence. It's simple.
Yeah, most people are in the past or in the future. I know I am.
Yeah.
Being present in the moment is difficult.
Yeah. One of my teachers, when I was going through my breathwork training, I remember I was in a session and there wasn't a lot happening with this client. A lot of times breathwork can be very active for the client. And I remember posting in our group instructor group chat thing. I was like, wow, sometimes this is boring. And his reply was, if you're bored, you're not paying attention. And that has stuck with me so much. And, abundance can mean so many things. But I know if I am present, I am much more aware of all the abundance that is around me.
Well, there's a billion things going on around us, and we're only paying attention to a handful. So
Yeah.
I get it. What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
I think I could answer the same answer. There's a calmness that has set in for me as I've matured, that all of the things that my mind thinks matters so much don't. And I wish I would have realized that at a much earlier age, of just all of the mental chaos that I kind of grew up with. It doesn't matter. It doesn't affect who I am. It doesn't affect how I have to choose to live.
And I saw a quote recently that kind of focuses on that, and I forget exactly what it was, but it's kind of along the line of whatever you're thinking is just your made up story about it. It's not real.
Yeah.
If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Oh, that's a good one. Everything you're doing matters. Keep going.
Yeah, at 18, you don't have a choice. You have to keep going.
I wanted to give up quite a few times when I was 18, 19, thankfully.
I think I was the opposite. At 18, I couldn't wait to go and to cut loose of all the things holding me back.
Yeah.
If people would like to learn more about your groups, your work, how can they find you?
Yeah, so I have Igniter Men's Group is my men's group, so ignitermensgroup.com. We do some in-person groups. I do online coaching and have some digital products and things on there to help men navigate some of these challenges and these polarities that we all face. And then my healing company is Somatic Synergies, integrated healing. So that's somaticsynergies.com. I also do virtual sessions, sometimes some online groups and breath work, and also in-person sessions. And I'm based in Denver, Colorado.
And we'll put those in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Are you ready for the inner journey to explore yourself and do the simple but not easy work? It's a game changer when you live in alignment with your purpose. Life becomes fun. Are you willing to explore yourself and make the changes so you live with no regrets? A simple one might be your money story. It's where we also always start the episode. What is yours, and does your money story still serve you? By the way, do you know somebody who might enjoy this episode? I would appreciate if you would share it with them. I'm sure they will too. Next week, we've got Jeff Woods to talk about the AI-driven leader. This is a game changer in AI. I use a lot of the things that I've learned from him. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.